you couldn't have made Lost in the way it was made if you'd made it in 1994. You wouldn't have done it in the same way if it was 2014. I think it's very much a show of that era. It's still so powerful even now. It's amazing that it's still in the public talking point. It's still in the consciousness. You know, it's now back on Netflix as we record. It's still out there, and it's great.
Both you and I have been staunch defenders of the end. We've often gone on Twitter, we've often spoke about the end, and we've often defended it. And we will no doubt talk about that when I get into that journey and get there eventually in the next 5 or 6 years. The fact that has that weight to it, and you know, it struggles to shake that off, where I feel like around this 20th anniversary, yes, there's still people still getting it like completely mixed up and not giving it a chance, but there is a significant amount of new audience now that are watching it without that baggage. And I think 20 years is an interesting time for it. It's just available on Netflix. People are going to watch it. It doesn't necessarily have all that heavy baggage that it did, you know, post 2010, really, does it? There's a little bit more distance with it. And you're right with the gap. I've talked about it with Darren Mooney, about, you know, the Sopranos and things, the HBO world and the sci-fi world and things like that was happening around this time. And this is network television and the like. But it feels like it's the right time to celebrate this TV show. It feels like it's the right time. You know, it has reflections on Game of Thrones as well. I'm not a Game of Thrones person, so I can't talk with any authority on that. But that's another ending that gets kind of put down on. So the fact that it sometimes comes up in that conversation, the baggage is not as heavy as it used to be. And I think it's an interesting time to be doing this podcast for a start off, but also, you know, for any newcomers that come along. I mean, this is not going to be great for newcomers. They'll have to watch all 6 seasons because this is spoiler fun.
Yeah.
But,
the thing is, I think it is the fate of any show like Lost, like The X-Files, like Game of Thrones, that become a phenomenon, that run for such a long time, that have such a depth of mythology and depth of fandom. I think it is the fate of all of them to have endings that people both heavily dislike and fundamentally misunderstand. And I think that was the case particularly with Lost and Game of Thrones. And even now, there are still people who misunderstand what Lost was doing when it got to that point, really. And they also won't let themselves think any differently. And I think that's just the nature of it. And I think it's always rawer at the time. And that there now are absolutely people who will turn around and defend the ending of Lost in much greater numbers than there were in 2010, when I was one of the few people. I felt like I was one of the only people at the time, you know, we didn't know each other then, but I'm sure we would have agreed. No. But I was one of the few people at the time who was saying, this is right, this is the right way to do it. And it was the same for Game of Thrones. I was getting so frustrated with people. And I was like, no, you've misunderstood what this whole story was about, guys. I just hope people will binge Lost.